What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins here on the Three Arts Per Carry podcast. Scouting the Fins is also part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. This show is brought to you by ThompsonCigar.com. Use promo code 3arts20 for 20% off your order of $75 or more. Once again, that's ThompsonCigar.com. All right, folks, we have a great show for you today. I'm joined by my co-host, Coach Smith, today. How are we doing?
Hey, doing good. I've spent the day, went to a major league game earlier today, did a TikTok with my daughter for the first time earlier today. So I'm looking forward to finally being able to talk some football today.
That's fantastic. And we're going to be doing another mock draft. Guys, it's mock draft season. Last week's show, we had Travis Wingfield on. We reviewed a little bit of the free agency. We deep dived a little bit into the draft to see what kind of players will be available for Miami and what kind of players they're looking to grab. Obviously, they're looking for high character, high IQ leaders, specifically within the first 2 or first 3 picks. But for the sake of today's show, we will be doing a 32-team first-round mock draft to get a sense of what the first round will look like, what are the team needs, and what the Dolphins may end up doing in the first round in this mock. Today, our other co-host, Eric, is a little bit busy, but Coach and I will go ahead and lead the show today and do our 32-team mock draft. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll be using the PFF mock draft simulator. First pick will be with the Tennessee Titans, and Coach will start us off.
Yeah, we're not going to start with any real surprises here. I think anything other than Cam Ward would be a pretty big surprise. You got Will Levis as the starter there in Tennessee right now with Brandon Allen and Tim Boyle behind him. So certainly nothing that would prevent you from taking a quarterback at number 1. Cam Ward is the best quarterback in this class, and I would be very surprised if the draft starts out with anything else other than Cam Ward.
Yep, I think that's probably the consensus at this point. The Titans had a pre-draft workout and a personal pre-draft workout with Cam Ward. The Browns here are a little bit intriguing because they could go quarterback here, especially with their quarterback situation in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson, how much they invested into him. So they could go quarterback here. But the consensus itself has the Browns at pick number 2, taking Abdul Carter. And I think they'll pick him unless they are blown away by a trade package, such as the Patriots. They may want to move up to 2 to take a guy like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, but I think the Browns stand pat and have that duo of Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett. That'll be dangerous for AFC North offenses. So I'll go ahead and pick on Abdul Carter for the Cleveland Browns.
And then with the Giants at 3, you could definitely see a scenario where they would go Travis Hunter. I think that Hunter is the most talented player in this draft. So certainly would not be surprised to see him go in the top 3. Special player in the sense that he can play offense or defense, right? I mean, you have a decent receiving core there in New York with Neighbors, Slayton, and Wan'Dale Robinson, probably a little softer in the cornerback room for them. So he could play either one, but at the same time, you would hope that next year they're not in position to draft a quarterback again. They have Russell Wilson, they have Jameis Winston, but neither of those guys are going to be long-term solutions. So if I was drafting for the Giants, I would go with Shedeur Sanders here, just because, like I said, if you're drafting in this spot now, then you're hoping that next year you're not in position to draft a quarterback again. So I wouldn't pass up a quarterback in this scenario.
Now, the question would be, would you trade down to recoup more picks if you're the Giants?
It would depend on who is coming up, right? And that, this entire draft is going to be a question of, you know, who is who's willing to come up and spend that those premium assets to come up. Like, I like Sanders. I don't love Sanders. I think that's going to be kind of a consensus. So I'm not sure how many teams will jump way up for him. I had done a 32 team 7 round mock draft, and in that one, the only trade in the top 20 was the Saints coming up from 9 to 4, I believe, trading with the Patriots to come up and get Sanders. So I could see a short jump like that for somebody to get Sanders. I don't see somebody, giving up multiple first and trading from, the low first round to come all the way up into the top 5 for Sanders.
So you don't see like the Jaguars going from pick 5 to pick 3 to take a guy like Travis Hunter who can solve that cornerback situation for the Jaguars.
Um, I could see that. I guess it would depend on how much the Giants like where they are, right? I can see the Giants liking that idea to drop that far and still be able to get a premier player. And really, from the Giants' perspective, if they were to drop that far, they could still get Sanders at number 5.
Yeah.
What would the offer be?
So the offer that what PFF has is for pick number 3, the Jaguars would have to give up the 5th pick and the 36th pick, maybe even the 70th pick, and that's a 59% chance for it to work. The other thing could be pick number 5 and next year's first rounder for the Jaguars.
Yeah, so I don't think they would give up next year's first rounder to move up 2 spots for him. I don't know. I'm going to pass on that trade because I'm not sure that the Jaguars would do it. Just because there's a lot of talent at the very top of this draft. I think when you get towards the middle of the first round, that's where the talent drops off, in my opinion. But I think that sitting at 5, you're still going to get a premier talent, even if, Hunter gets taken by the Patriots at 4. Still going to have a premier talent for you waiting at 5 and not have to give something up to move up to it. So I'm going to stay at 3 for the Giants and take Sanders here.
Yep, Shadur Sanders is the pick for the New York Giants, and I think the New England Patriots are absolutely elated that they have a chance to draft Travis Hunter, who can be the number 2 guy right next to Christian Gonzalez, or be the second or third best wide receiver, maybe even the first best wide receiver on the team for the Patriots. And it's really dependent on what that Patriots front office and coaches think of playing at Travis Hunter. Do you play him as wide receiver 1? Do you have him as CB2? Or do you have him primarily as CB2 with some snaps sprinkled in as wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and some sub-package group? So that's going to be very interesting, and Dolphins fans are not going to like this pick at all. So Travis Hunter, it is for the New England Patriots.
All right, so we got the Jaguars on the clock at 5 here. Like I said, still some really good players here. Part of the reason that I didn't want to come up with the Jaguars is because I think they have a pretty good receiving room with Brian Thomas, Diami Brown, and Parker Washington. Now the cornerback room is a bit lighter. You got Jerrion Jones, Tyson Campbell, and then they brought in Jordan Lewis from Dallas. That's in there as well. You could make an argument that they could consider going with Will Campbell this high, right? You have McCarr that they brought in to play one guard, but at the other side, you got Ezra Cleveland. They did bring in Adoga from Dallas. Let's see. Not going to go running back. I really think that, and this is one that, again, I don't think that Dolphins fans are going to like this, but I really like this player. And it's going to be very dependent on the health and the way that he's able to work out. But looking at what the Jaguars have in the cornerback room, I think that this could be, the high point for a Will Johnson to go. And again, this is very dependent on the health, right? If Will Johnson did not have the injury, he would be in that top 5 area. He would be competing with Travis Hunter as the top cornerback in this class. So again, completely depending on him being able to work out for the teams individually, which he hasn't been able to do yet. I'm going to send Will Johnson to the Jaguars.
Wow. That's I think in a lot of mock drafts, I think that's pretty high for Will Johnson to go at number 5 because he's been sliding into the early teens and late teens lately. All right, on to the 6th pick, which is the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders have a lot of needs, and they have a new coach in Pete Carroll, former Seahawks head coach, Super Bowl winning head coach. They have needs at running back, which leads me to believe Ashton Jeanty could be the pick. But then there's the wide receiver group. Like, there's not, outside of Brock Bowers, who else, do they have? Like, Geno Smith is going to need somebody to throw to. Then there's the argument of, okay, you have Max Crosby, you have Christian Wilkins, who's coming back. That's a formidable, already good defensive line group. You're playing in the AFC West up against Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, a great offensive line in the Broncos with Bo Nix. You need to be able to disrupt the quarterback. Now, with Pete Carroll, he's a very defensive-minded head coach, but for the Raiders to actually generate some points and actually go toe-to-toe with the Chargers, with the Chiefs, and even with the Broncos, they need some type of offensive explosion. They did really well with Josh Jacobs as their running back, but there's no one else in this tier offensively that can really be an immediate game changer on the field and a fantastic leader off the field with high character. There's 2 guys, one on offense, one on defense. But I think if I'm the Raiders, if I want to go toe to toe, I need to have that offensive firepower. I need to have that offensive explosion. And I think the Raiders, and especially Mark Davis, is going to go with the guy like Ashton Jeanty. So Ashton Jeanty is my pick for the Las Vegas Raiders.
All right, and then looking here at the Jets, can I just can I give them Quinn Ewers because it's the Jets, and I would prefer to see that for them. But no, in seriousness, the Jets are obviously in a rebuilding mold as well. They're not looking for they're not going to be Super Bowl contenders in this next season. Obviously still have some really good players on the board. Kind of surprised that we haven't found a spot for Mason Graham yet, because I feel like he's really a elite player in this draft. I don't think that the Jets is going to be that place because of having Quinnen Williams and Derek Nottie there already. But there is a potential to have him there as well. Looking at the offensive line for the Jets, right now they have Carter Warren, who I've never even heard of, at right tackle. So for them, I'm going to go with a player that I may not have as high on my personal board, but it's still a player that's very much in the top 10 in a lot of boards, right? So I'm going to go with Armand Membao here for the Jets.
All right, and you have him over Will Campbell.
Not that I necessarily have him over Campbell. I just think that for the Jets specifically, having John Simpson and Vera Tucker at guards, I think that getting a player that is more likely to be able to play out at tackle in Membao would be the direction that they would go over Campbell.
All right, Will Campbell is the pick for Armand Membao is the pick for the New York Jets. All right, I have pick number 8 for the Carolina Panthers, and I think this is probably the prime landing spot for Mason Graham. Carolina needs a lot of help with their pass rush, either on the edge, on the interior. This is probably the prime landing spot for an edge guy like a Jalen Walker. But Mason Graham is still on the board, and if we're going by the board, the consensus top picks, if Mason Graham is available, you gotta take him. He's a difference maker in the interior. And Mason Graham is the pick for the Carolina Panthers for me.
All right, so now we're on to the Saints. And looking across what we have for the consensus top here. Can you scroll down a little bit? Let me see who else is here. All right, we got McMillan, Campbell, Barron is definitely a good name. Tyler Warren is a good name. Starks, Campbell. All right, that's good. So, when I look at the Saints roster, right, and surprised to see Campbell fall a little bit here. But the Saints look pretty decent as far as offensive line goes with Fuaga, Radins, McCoy, Ruiz, and then Trevor Penning as well. So not sure if they're – I don't want to say desperate to take an offensive lineman because, when you look at a player like Will Campbell, that's not a player that you have to be desperate to take. I see him as a early Pro Bowl player inside at guard. I think he's really special in the run game. But also looking at the wide receiver room of the Saints, you got Chris Olave there. That's a good piece. You got Brandon Cooks, who, has some value, but not really a top flight receiver. And then Rashid Shaheed is who they have listed as their slot receiver. I know that opinions are all over the place on Tet McMillan, but I'm still really high on him. I mean, that he can do stuff that other receivers in this draft cannot do in terms of being able to go up and get the ball. I know that there is some concern with, I think his 40 time wasn't the best, but with the size and the explosion in terms of the jumping ability that he has to be able to go up and get a ball, I think that Tet McMillan would be a great fit for the Saints.
All right, Tate McMillan is the pick for the New Orleans Saints. All right, the Chicago Bears pretty much retooled a lot of their offense and specifically their offensive line. Like this pick for me right here would be for Will Campbell, but they retooled their entire offensive line throughout free agency. So are they actually going to get a guy like Will Campbell? Like they added Joe Tooney, Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman. So I think the commitment could be with the defensive side of the ball. They added defensive tackles and ends in Grady Jarrett and Deo Odenigbo. So they addressed their biggest needs already, and they're in prime position to basically take BPA, best player available. And I do think if you are taking the best player available right now, if Ashton Jeanty is not on the board, Will Campbell has to be able to be the best player on the Bears board. Braxton Jones is coming off a serious injury suffered late last season, and new head coach Ben Johnson basically confirmed that he'll be limited starting in training camp, and Will Campbell could compete for that left tackle spot. And we saw Caleb Williams try to extend a lot of plays last season, and the offensive line couldn't do anything. So continuing to develop and support your quarterback by having a strong, solid offensive line, whether Campbell plays tackle or guard, I think with the Bears, he could be able to play both in a pinch. And if he does sit for a little bit, he'll likely learn. And if Braxton Jones leaves, you have Will Campbell right there already waiting in the wings. So why not go ahead, invest more in your offensive line? And Will Campbell is the pick for the Chicago Bears at number 10.
Yeah, I know that one's kind of, might be a surprising pick to some with them having Tooney and whoever else they got at right guard. But the point is there that they do have openings at tackle, right? So if you bring Campbell in and you play him at tackle in 2025 and he can't, you decide that's not a great position for him, Tooney's only got a year or two left and there's going to be an open spot at guard where you can move him in. So I think that's kind of a sneaky good pick there. So we get to the 49ers here at pick 11. And had you not taken Campbell at 10, I was going to send Campbell to the 49ers to replace Ben Barch as their starting guard there. But looking through the rest of it, I think that a sneaky good pick for them here could be Jihad Campbell, right? They just lost Dre Greenlaw in free agency. I think that Campbell does a lot of similar stuff to what Dre Greenlaw could. So them being able to see the value of having a Fred Warner and a Campbell together, I think could be a really interesting move for them there. But the direction that I'm going to go here is a player that I really like for the Dolphins, and that's going to be somebody to help out their secondary. Jahdae Barron is a guy that is going to primarily play at cornerback, but he's not locked in as a cornerback. So I think that, looking at the secondary that the 49ers have, I see some opportunities there. And when you have a player as good as Barron still on the board here, I think they would be hard pressed to pass him up.
Jahdae Barron is the pick for the San Francisco 49ers. All right, pick number 12. We have the Dallas Cowboys, and Cowboys need a lot on the offense. They need offensive line. They need another wide receiver opposite of CD Lamb. They also need a running back. If Ashton Junti was there, that would have been my pick for the Cowboys. They could also trade back and get a guy like Omarion Hampton. Later on, they also need a wide receiver. There are a couple of trade offers there already, like the Arizona Cardinals at pick 16, Cincinnati Bengals at pick 17, Vikings at 24. There are a lot of good players available too. You have Tyler Warren, Malachi Starks, Jod Campbell, Mike Green, Luther Burden III, James Pierce Jr., Kenneth Grant, and Izuraku. I think if their general manager Jerry Jones wants to maximize, I think you're going to want to trade and get as much value as you can while still selecting a good enough player. But for this mock draft, let's not make it a little bit difficult. I think I'm going to stand pat, and I think they're actually going to take a wide receiver, and it's not going to be Burden or Egbuka. I think it's going to be Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden. 6'1", 6'2", good speed, very good complement to CD Lamb, and gives another weapon for quarterback Dak Prescott to work off of.
All right, and then we get to 13, right? The one that everybody's here for. For me, obviously these kind of drafts are tough because me and you are going to pick players that we like. So the guys that we are hoping are going to fall to the Dolphins are guys that we're sending to other teams, probably against our better judgment with some of these picks. But if the board does fall this way and we see the guys falling off the board that we would really like to consider for the Dolphins, for me, it would really come down to the top two guys that are listed here, right?
Yeah. And Tyler before Warren. We get into that, Coach, we are going to head to break. I know we're teasing you guys with this pick already, but we have to go to break right here. All right, folks, grab your phone and grab your dancing shoes. It's time to make entries on March College basketball with Underdog. Nothing beats March basketball, but we're in April now, so it's okay. Bring the fun of a bracket to every game day by making entries on Underdog. To play, choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats. Points, assists, rebounds, and more. They've got all your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. Create entries with all basketball picks or mix and match across other sports. You can play with as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn $1 into 1,000 just with your hoops knowledge. Download the Underdog app and sign up now using the promo code 3YARDS. That's 3YARDS, 3 yards on Underdog to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with promo code 3YARDS. Claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon first deposit. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog.
Must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 19 plus in Alabama, New England, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369.
All right, folks, and we are back. So the Dolphins at pick number 13, Coach. There's a lot of ways this pick can go. You have a lot of good players. You have potential draft proposals as well. So you're Chris Greer. You're wearing Chris Greer's hat right now. Where are you going with this pick? Because I have a feeling I know where I'm going, but you're making this pick for the Dolphins.
Yeah. So, I mean, in addition to the two names that we have here in Warren and Starks, we all know that the defensive line room, especially with Calais Campbell, leaving for the Cardinals a couple days ago, is a huge hole in the room, right? I know that Kenneth Grant is a name that's been tossed around there a lot as a potential target there, and I do like Grant. I really like Tyler Warren as well. I think Tyler Warren could be a player that can come in, could be that Y tight end that we want Julian Hill to be, can be a contributor in the run game and still be a very valuable weapon in the passing game. But when it comes to Grant, I think that the options that will be on the board at 48, I think are going to be maybe not equal, right, but close enough that I'm willing to take that risk. That's going to be a position in terms of interior defensive line that you're going to have to rotate pieces anyways. You're not going to be looking for a guy that's going to play 800-900 snaps. So I think I would go away from Kenneth Grant here. And as much as I, really like Tyler Warren and what he could do for the offense, I still feel like there are some significant holes in the secondary. When you look at cornerback 3 being either Storm Duck or Cam Smith, like that's not a great place to be in. You have the injury concerns with Melifonwu. You have Ashton Davis, who hasn't started a lot. So my pick here is going to be Malachi Starks. And my reason for that is that even though he is not a cornerback, we know that the Raven-style defense and Anthony Weaver likes to run those 3 safety sets, which I think will reduce the number of snaps that you need to run the 3 cornerback sets. And maybe we can find somebody lower in the draft who is talented, right, but maybe is not a day one, put him opposite Jalen Ramsey the way that, say, Will Johnson would be had he fallen this far. But I just think that from a secondary leadership, kind of looking for somebody to be a captain of the defense for a long time, I think that Malachi Starks would be a great fit. So what were you thinking there?
I was thinking safety as well with Malachi Starks, but I was actually going to go for a trade back, specifically with the Seahawks. They're only at pick 18. Maybe they can give us another top 100 pick for them moving forward. And they would have potentially gotten the likes of still Malachi Starks available, but looking at a couple of other players on the board and their ADP rank, you still have great guys in Kenneth Grant. You would have gotten good value with him at number 18. I don't think Grant is a guy you'd pick at number 13 or earlier than that, just based off of value. You also have Josh Simmons available, Emeka Egbuka, Kelvin Banks Jr., maybe a Tyler Warren. I feel like if you're going to get a blue chip player at number 13, he has to be able to impact the team, whether it be on offense or defense. Like if we are taking a look at a difference maker in this league, it's going to be a guy on offense because the NFL is more so generated toward explosive plays toward the offense. With this recent new kickoff change where instead of starting at the 30, they're starting at the 35, you get 2 first downs and the Dolphins are within Jason Sanders' kicking range. So you want a guy who can create some explosive plays to gain some yards after the catch. You have that in Devon Achane. You have that in Jonnu Smith. You have that in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Why not add one more guy that can help out in the passing game, but also really be that impact player in the run game? So if they weren't looking to trade down, my pick would be tight end Tyler Warren.
Very good.
All right, and with this, the Indianapolis Colts, they need a tight end. They need a difference maker. They need a weapon outside of Michael Pittman Jr. For the Colts and Jonathan Taylor, who is their running back. They need a tight end, and the Colts have operated really well with good tight ends. You can look at Dallas Clark with Peyton Manning as well. Mo Alley Cox wasn't the best, but he was able to get some stuff done in the run game, in the pass game as well. I think historically, the Colts have done well when their tight ends do well in the run game and the passing game. Tyler Warren is the pick for the Indianapolis Colts, and they do need a tight end.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so looking at the Falcons here, so I like the youth that they have on the offensive side of the ball. When you look at the Michael Penix, you got Bijan Robinson, Drake London is a great piece to have as a wide receiver. They just lost their center last year, going to the Vikings, I think, or no, he went to the Bears. Part of that, the rebuild there. Looking on the defensive side of the ball, I think that they have more holes on the defensive side of the ball. I think that this would be a great place for Jahad Campbell to go. A player that can do a lot of different things. So I think that, for that Falcons defense would be a player that can move around a lot and have impact. So I'm going to go with Jahad Campbell to the Falcons.
Wow. I would have went in a different direction. I would still stick with the defense. I would have chosen a pass rusher, whether that would be a guy like Shamar Stewart or Mike Green, or maybe someone on the interior, because let's face it, they lost one of their biggest veterans and a team leader in Grady Jarrett, and that is a very big loss. They need someone to stop the run. They need someone to stop the passer. Raheem Morris would be ecstatic with the pick for Jahad Campbell, but I think an interior guy or an actual pass rusher on the edges would have solved the problem and would have fulfilled their biggest needs. All right, as we go to number 16 for the Arizona Cardinals, this one's a bit weird for me because I would have taken Jahad Campbell here because a Kaiser White return to the Cardinals is unlikely. All they have is Akeem Davis-Gaither, who was signed in free agency, and he doesn't have a lot of experience. Jahad Campbell would have been the best off-ball linebacker, very versatile. That's something that the Cardinals have valued in the past. But then you also need interior defensive linemen that can stop the run. You need an edge rusher as well that can help to stop the run, rush the passer. But then there's the opposite side of things on the offense where you need to keep Kyler Murray upright. You need lanes for Trey Benson and James Conner. So can they go offensive line here? So if I'm taking a look at this offensive line group right now, you have Josh Simmons, Kelvin Banks Jr., Gray Zabel, and the Cardinals have an affinity for Ohio State products and players. They did that last season in back-to-back Ohio State picks. And I'll be damned if they don't pick another Buckeyes player. So I'm going to go with offensive lineman Josh Simmons to the Arizona Cardinals, just because of their affinity for Buckeyes people, and they need people to be able to move in the run game and keep Kyler Murray upright. So Josh Simmons is my pick.
Yeah, I like that pick there. Kind of surprised that Simmons lasted that long. Would have been my pick for the Bengals had he still been there. But still along that same thought process, we know that the Bengals, they brought back Mike Gesicki. They signed Chase and Higgins to their contracts. They're working on something with Trey Hendrickson. But their offensive line is still very much a mess. I mean, we look at the Dolphins' offensive line and talk about how bad that is. And the Bengals' line is even worse. I mean, they have Orlando Brown at left tackle, who is, probably still serviceable, but he's getting up there in age now. You have Amarius Mims on the right side, who is, young and inexperienced. But then on the inside, you've got Volson, Karras, and Ford. Not really impressed with any of those three guys. So I think that here, if I was drafting for the Bengals, I would be trying to find the top rated guy that could play inside, right? And that would be, if a Josh Simmons was still on the board, then I would be drafting him and looking for him to play inside for a year or two before kicking outside for a Josh Simmons. I could see them doing something similar with a Kelvin Banks, who opinions on Banks are all over the board. Like, some have him in the 15 range, and some have him all the way down in the second round. Some say that he can only play tackle. Some say that he could play both. I think that he is a top 15 player that can play either. But with this pick here, just knowing that I want them to have a guard, I want to be able to keep Joe Burrow upright, I'm going to take Tyler Booker all the way up here. I'm still very high on him. I know there's some questions about him being able to run an outside zone scheme, but that's not necessarily what the Bengals do. So I think that, adding a strong piece to the middle of that line would go a long way to keeping Joe Burrow up and, giving him time to throw to Higgins and Chase and Gesicki.
Wow. So you're becoming more offense lenient for the Bengals. This is not something that I personally would expect the Bengals to do, because they have needs along the defensive line. And taking a look at their profile, especially when they draft and they draft high, they really do need defenders, and they need long, lengthy, rangy defenders that can be multiple along the defensive line. So a guy like Shamar Stewart would have been my best guess here. We don't know the status of Trey Hendrickson right now. But taking a look at the draft profile of the Bengals, especially where they really need someone at, is along the defensive line. So my guess would have been a Shamar Stewart or even a Mike Green, who was a combine stud. Pick number 18 for the Seahawks is going to be a trench guy. It's either an offensive lineman or someone on the defensive line side of the ball. The best player available right now is going to be edge Mike Green. Now, is this something that Mike McDonald will want? Like, if we take a look at the edge profiles of the Baltimore style of defense, they are long and they are very athletic. Mike Green is not long. He is not tall, but he has a gigantic wingspan. He is very fast, very bendy, and very, very athletic. He can drop a little bit into coverage, but if you comp him, he's like Chop Robinson maxed out with uber athleticism. And they need help along the defensive lineman. Mike McDonald would be ecstatic to have him. My pick for them would be Mike Green right here.
Yeah, obviously a very talented player, has some possible off-field stuff that has to be clarified for him to go that high. But, if that stuff checks out and you can feel confident about what you're getting off the field, then on the field, I mean, that's an absolute steal at this point for him. So as we move on to the Buccaneers, we're going to talk about a player that we've mentioned a few times here. Again, sticking on the defensive side, right? Looking at a defensive end edge hybrid type player, right? The 280-pound range, right? Shamar Stewart, I think, would be a great fit here with the Buccaneers in terms of somebody that can, not defensive tackle wise, but when you're looking at a 3-4, being able to play that defensive end role, he's got the size to be able to do that. And he has the explosion to be able to really rush off the edge and just, be able to create havoc. So I think that he would be a good player for the Buccaneers to add.
All right. Yeah, they did lose Joe Trout Shinaka in free agency. They need to shore up that defensive line, get a little bit more younger. and Todd Bowles is predicated on having a good pass rush for them. So Shamar Stewart is the pick for the Buccaneers. For the Broncos, I'm going a little bit back and forth with. You can get a running back. They don't have Javonte Williams anymore. They also need a wide receiver. They can get a guy like that and Luther Burden the third. But they have a lot of interior defensive linemen that are entering contract years. And this is a very rich, very heavy defensive line draft. So I'm thinking maybe they could get a guy like Kenneth Grant, really shore up that interior. You don't want to wait until that defensive line falls into array, especially up against the Chiefs offense and their brand new offensive line. Not brand new, but upgraded offensive line. That Chargers offensive line, which should be a beast this season. And then you also have the Raiders offensive line, and if they do get Alshon Jeudy. So they would need a run stopper. They would need people to stop the offense. But then you take a look at the Broncos offense last season. Bo Nix was able to do really well with that offensive line, but if you give him another weapon, like a Luther Burden III, or even an Emeka Egbuka, opposite of the wide receiver room, they could potentially become the number one or number two wide receivers opposite of Cortland Sutton. So the philosophy is more weapons, or do we want to stop the weapons that other opposing offenses has? And I think the Broncos, for them to go toe-to-toe, they might go wide receiver right here. And I don't think it's going to be Luther Burden the third. I think it's going to be Emeka Egbuka. Like, you want a guy who has the IQ in route running, who can run routes really well, can block, can get dirty. Emeka Egbuka's size profile as well. He's around 6 foot 6'1". He brings more size to that wide receiver room up against the DBs of the Chiefs and the Chargers and even the Raiders, who are a little bit on the smaller size. That gives Bo Nix another person with a larger target area to throw to. And I think he fits really nicely into that offense. So Emeka Egbuka is my pick for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, I like that one. Like you said, they need very intelligent players there. And I think that Egbuka being able to play in the Sean Payton offense, I think is going to be a lot of fun there. So getting to the Steelers here, scrolling through their roster, and the big elephant in the room is the fact that their quarterbacks right now on the roster are Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson, right? And, they've already seen what Mason Rudolph can do, and we've already seen what Skylar Thompson can do, right? So neither of these guys are guys that you want starting in 2025 or guys that you want to try and develop for, the future. Seems like they're flirting with Aaron Rodgers, trying to get him in there. But even if Rodgers goes to Pittsburgh, you're looking at a 1 to 2 year type deal. So I'm going to go maybe a little unexpected here, in the sense that, well, not unexpected. I'm going to go quarterback here, right? Because the Steelers clearly need a development prospect at quarterback here, but a player that we've heard some talk about getting into the first round, and I don't have a first round grade on him, but quarterbacks transcend those grades, right? Quarterbacks are always going to get drafted way higher than what you think they should, especially when you're talking about first round quarterbacks, because you get that fifth year option with the first round picks, right? So I'm going to go with Jackson Dart here for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Wow, we get he's not ranked highly for PFF. His rank is 129, but he's being picked up in the middle of the second round, and they do need a quarterback. And I could see the Steelers being a potential trade-up candidate if Shadur Sanders is not picked either top 5 or maybe even top 10. Like, they have the draft capital for this year and next year to grab a tier 1 quarterback in Shadur Sanders and maybe even Cam Ward. All right, next up on the clock is the Los Angeles Chargers. They have needs at wide receiver. They could get a tight end like Colson London from Michigan, but I'm going to go with a different Michigan player for the Chargers. If you take a look at their depth chart, who do they have on the defensive line that is the run stopper, that is also a pass rusher as well? Khalil Mack is up there in age. Their second best pass rusher is Bud Dupree. On the defensive line, they have Otito Ogbonia and Justin Eboigbe, along with Tuli Tupulotu, who has been a good talent for them, but they need more on the defensive line. They have the weapons. They have a great quarterback in Justin Herbert. Quentin Johnson had a better year. I forget who is their tight end. I know it's I'm blanking on the name. Remind me, Coach. The tight end for the Chargers is actually Will Disley. He's not super great, as I
For the
said,
Seahawks, yep.
but still works out. I think they go defensive line here. They need people to push. They need to be able to stop a guy like Ashton Jeanty. They need to be able to stop that Chiefs running game. They need to be able to put pressure on Patrick Mahomes. That Broncos offensive line is no joke, especially in that Sean Payton system and that Sean Payton scheme. And in this draft, they get Emeka Egbuka. The best way to impact the offense is to get after the quarterback and stop the run. And I think Michigan defensive lineman Kenneth Grant does that. Harbaugh gets his Michigan guy.
Yeah, so I mean, this kind of shows how much in line we are with a lot of this stuff, because Kenneth Grant would have been a player that I really considered for the Packers with the next pick here.
Yeah.
Another player that, again, when you're looking at the interior defensive line guys, right, they're not going to play 800 snaps. These are guys that can rotate. I think that the Packers have a fairly solid roster. I think they'd be in a pretty good spot to be able to pick best player available. So I could see a scenario where they would take a player like Kenneth Grant if they felt like that was the best player left on the board. But for the Packers here, looking through the needs that they have here, I see that the needs listed by PFF, they say wide receiver, but I kind of like the group of Christian Watson, Jalen Reed, and Romeo Doubs. I like that group. Looking at the edges, Rashawn Gary and Kingsley Enagbari, I believe is how you would pronounce it. I think that an edge would be a good place for them to go here. And I don't know how he fits as far as a physical specimen for what the Packers do, but James Pierce is, just electric off the edge. A player that if you get him in the right system, you use him the right way, you're not asking him to be just a, 3 down or early down run stuff or that type of thing. But if you get him in there, you rotate him in, you let him just fly off the edge, I think he can be an impact player. So I'm going to go with James Pierce here for the Packers, kind of as a BPA type deal, and a player that has the physical skills to dominate.
Yeah, I think with their profile of who they would usually draft, I think Donovan Iziraku would have been the better choice over James Pierce Jr. They value productivity over, well, I wouldn't say they valued productivity over athleticism. They drafted a guy who was uber athletic out of Iowa. I keep blanking on his name, and he hasn't produced yet for the Packers. But if Brian Gutekunst, he takes a look at his recent mistakes and is able to move off of them a year or so, and he's able to learn from them, I think he would be making a mistake drafting James Pierce Jr. based on his character concerns, some off the field stuff as well, and just some of the film we saw with him. I think Iziraku would have been the better pick over Pierce Jr. For the Vikings, they don't have a lot of picks. All right, they really don't have a lot of picks, but they need impact guys specifically in the defense. I think they're going to go with the defensive back right here. They re-signed Harrison Smith, but how long is he going to be playing for? They lost Cam Bynum in free agency, who was the perfect fit for this Brian Flores style of defense. I think they're going to go with another defensive back and highly athletic defensive back. You don't have Jade Barron here. You don't have Will Johnson. But you do have a guy in Nick Manwari who can be taught, who can play all over the field. He can play box, he can play deep, he can be that run stopper as well. He fits in nicely with this type of style of defense, and he could be the guy that Brian Flores can look to groom and develop to be, the quarterback of this defense.
Yeah. So, all right, looking at the Texans, I think looking at the way this board fell for the Texans, it's going to be pretty simple for me, right? I think they would be thrilled to see Kelvin Banks fall to them here at, what are we at, 25. They need a lot of help on the offensive line. Like I said, I personally feel that Banks is a player that could play on the inside until he has a chance to go to the outside. Feel that he is a top 15 player. So for him to be sitting here at 25 for a team that has offensive line needs, I feel like that one is pretty close to a no-brainer at this point for the Houston Texans.
Yeah, Kelvin Banks Jr. is the pick right here. For the Rams, they could go wide receiver here because they did lose Cooper Kupp. But Luther Burden III does not bring that size and speed profile that Sean McVay is looking for. And I think they go with tight end over here over linebacker and corner, which is a need. I think they're going to go with tight end Colston Loveland here. And my reasoning is because they need a guy who has the speed, who also has the size. He can handle those responsibilities as a big body from the slot. He's not the best blocker like a lot of, traditional tight ends, but he has the speed and the receiving skills to be a clean fit for Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford. And he was the leading receiver for this Michigan offense. So you give a good compliment in Colston Loveland to Puka Nacua and a reliable target to Matthew Stafford. So Colston Loveland is the pick here for the Los Angeles Rams.
All right. And then looking at the Ravens here, see that guard is listed there as one of their top needs, right? They have Andrew Voorhees. They've got Daniel Falele, who didn't seem like a lot of Ravens fans were thrilled with at guard. And then Ben Cleveland. They lost Makari in free agency. This is a spot that I think could be an interesting one for a guy like Donovan Jackson to go. Just because I do feel that his better position in the NFL is going to be as a guard, but also a player that has tackle flexibility. Part of that, could come down to how they see the wide receiver room developing as well, right? I mean, they have DeAndre Hopkins there and Zay Flowers, but is Burden still on the board as
Burden
well?
is still there.
So those are probably the two players that I would really look at for them. I think that Burden brings definitely different stuff than what Zay Flowers does in terms of being a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, I think. And looking between those two, I think that they have not shown a tendency to draft offensive linemen quite this high, at least in terms of interior offensive linemen. It's been more undrafted and lower round guys. So I think here I'm going to go with Luther Burden for the Ravens.
They get another wide receiver opposite Zay Flowers, albeit same type of wide receiver. The more, the merrier. Another reliable target, yak guy for Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. All right, pick number 28 for the Detroit Lions. General Manager Brad Holmes likes to take good athletes from big schools that can also produce well. But they do have needs along the trenches, specifically along the offensive line and the defensive line. They did lose one of their, I believe their difference makers on offense, which was offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. But they also lost a good amount of talent on the defensive line, specifically Ellen McNeil. Aiden Hutchinson is returning from injury as well. So they need to beef up that defensive line and really get back to smash mouth, taking your kneecaps as well, and being really productive. I think they're going to get a guy who can get you a lot of good plays as an interior defensive lineman, at least 4 to 5 good plays that can make a difference in the game. I think that's going to be Walter Nolan. You already have Aiden Hutchinson. You have another pass rusher opposite of him. You need another difference maker on the defensive line, specifically on the interior, that can pass rush, that can also take on some gaps, that can also be that run stopper. Walter Nolan is my pick for the Lions over here.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick there. Not a fan of Nolan going in the top 10 where he's talked about at one point, but I think that at this point, you're looking at good value for the splash plays that he is capable of bringing. For the Washington Commanders, looking at their depth chart, looking at Andrew Wiley at right tackle is not a player that I would be thrilled about. And we've still got a tackle on the board that I have a first-round grade on. So I think that putting Josh Connerly on the Commanders would be a good way to shore up that offensive line.
All right, so we are picking Josh Connerly for the Washington Commanders. Go ahead. Josh Connerly is the pick here for the Commanders. I think for the Bills, they have needs on defense. Von Miller is getting old. They also need a cornerback really, really, really badly, and they need another edge rusher. You can get good value in Michael Williams, Jalen Walker, but I'm more so in line of them getting a cornerback over here. They really need help on the back end, and their defense is predicated on defensive back blitzes. Yeah, we know the front four and even the defensive line can get home, but if you send that extra pass rusher, who is a defensive back, who is long, who is rangy, and can also cover, that is going to be a very big asset for Sean McDermott. I know they just extended Christian Benford, who does that, but they need a lockdown corner on the other side. And I'm going to go with Siobhan Ravel here for the Buffalo Bills. They need a corner. He can be that lockdown guy, and he fits in the Sean McDermott defense.
All right. So looking at the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm going to go kind of a direction that I don't know if they would go in the draft necessarily, but a player that I think could make sense for them. When you look at Travis Kelce is very late in his career, could be a fun opportunity to add a player that could do a lot of the same things that he can. So I'm going to go with Colston Loveland here, right? As a player that can play in two tight end sets.
He was taken by the Rams. I picked him.
He was?
The Rams. Yeah.
Crap. All right, let's see. So next thing for them is I'm looking over their roster. Linebackers, not good. Let's go with Ezraku, right? Can never have enough good edge rushers. We've talked about him several times here. So I'm going to go with Ezraku here for the Chiefs.
Yeah, but can never have enough pass rushers. They need a little bit more help on defense to pass rush, good offensive linemen and quarterbacks. For the Broncos and the Chargers, they play those two teams twice here. All right, the last pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. I really don't think a wide receiver is needed here. I picked number 32, that number 3 wide receiver. Johnny Wilson was decent enough to help block for them. They have a great running back in Saquon Barkley. Offensive line is great. They're former Super Bowl champions. You can never have enough pass rushers. I think this follows suit with going back to their pipeline at Georgia. And they can either take an edge rusher here. They can take a linebacker. It's pick your poison at this point. And I think the Eagles could pick up a versatile guy like Jalen Walker, who can drop into coverage, who can rush the passer, and he can really be an asset for this Vic Fangio style of defense. He can be the dropper. He can be the pass rusher. We saw Vic Fangio in Miami utilizing a lot of these edge guys and even sometimes linebackers to pass rush. He can be his next Zach Bond, his next Andrew Van Ginkel. And I think Jalen Walker fits that profile pretty nicely. And there we have it, folks. That is our 32-team first round mock draft. Let us know what you think on the comments below and tweet at us. I'm your host, Hussam Patel, and my co-host, Coach Smith. As always, folks, go Fins.